I never thought the day I buried my husband would also be the day my son buried me alive in shame. 3 weeks after Thomas's funeral, I sat in the attorney's office with my son, Caleb, believing grief would bind us closer. Instead, it tore us apart. The lawyer read the will. Caleb inherited the penthouse, the investments, the glory, and me, a garage, just a rusted garage on the edge of town. Caleb leaned down, his voice cold, sharp, almost amused. "Mom, you're too fragile to handle real assets." Dad knew that. In that moment, I realized the boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed for, saw me not as his mother, but as a burden. And that's where my story begins. I can still see the beige walls of that lawyer's office, the way the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as if mocking my grief. My husband, Thomas, had been in the ground for just 3 weeks. I hadn't even gotten used to waking up in an empty bed, yet there I was, sitting in a stiff leather chair, hands clenched in my lap, while the future of everything we had built together was being parceled out in legal language I barely understood. Beside me sat my son, Caleb, my only child, my blood. He was polished to perfection, like always, dark gray suit tailored to fit, hair slicked back, shoes that reflected the light like mirrors. He looked like success, like control, like the man he had worked so hard to become. For a fleeting moment, I thought, Thomas would have been proud of him today. But then Caleb leaned back, crossed his legs, and flashed that smug smile I knew all too well. Not the smile of a son grieving his father, not the smile of a boy once proud to bring me his report cards. No, it was the smile of someone waiting for his winnings to be announced. Mr. Donnelly, our family attorney for decades, cleared his throat and shuffled the stack of papers in front of him. His glasses slid down his nose, and he pushed them up nervously. "Before I begin," he said, "I want to assure you that everything here is legally binding and precisely as Thomas instructed." That should have been my first warning, that careful phrase, delivered with the kind of caution lawyers use when they know the storm is coming. The words after that blurred together like ink in rainwater. There were legal terms, financial accounts, itemized lists. I heard the important pieces only in fragments, each one hitting me like a stone. To his son, Caleb Mercer, Thomas leaves the family home, the downtown office building, and his primary investment accounts. I felt Caleb's body shift beside me, a satisfied exhale escaping him like steam from a kettle. And to his wife, Charlotte Mercer, I sat up straighter, ready to hear the next words. Surely my husband had left me something of meaning, our retirement account, perhaps, or at least the lake cabin where we'd spent so many summers. He leaves the property located at 412 Fairmont Avenue, currently registered as a garage. The silence that followed was deafening, a garage. After 42 years of marriage, of raising a son, of standing beside Thomas through every triumph and setback, he had left me a garage. Caleb's hand landed on my shoulder with a theatrical pat, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of everything. You're too fragile to manage real assets anyway." His words cut through me like ice. Fragile, that's what he saw when he looked at me. A woman too old, too soft, too irrelevant to handle her own life. The lawyer didn't meet my eyes. He kept shuffling papers, his discomfort written in the tight lines around his mouth. I swallowed hard, fighting the burn in my throat. I wanted to defend myself, to tell Caleb I wasn't some porcelain doll he could put on a shelf while he ransacked the legacy his father had built. But grief does strange things to courage. My tongue felt heavy, my voice lost in the cavern of that sterile office. Instead, I sat there quietly as Caleb leaned back in his chair, victorious. I thought about all the nights Thomas and I had spent planning our retirement, about the sacrifices I had made to support his career, about the birthdays and anniversaries we had marked with whispered promises that we were building something together. And now, according to a few sheets of paper, that something amounted to a dusty old garage on the outskirts of town. By the time we left the office, Caleb was already on his phone, bragging to someone about expanding his portfolio. He barely said goodbye. I walked to my car slowly, the key to my so-called inheritance heavy in my hand. Rust had eaten into its grooves, leaving it rough against my fingers. I stared at it in disbelief. A garage. My husband had left me a garage. As I slid into the driver's seat, the city moved around me as if nothing had changed. Cars honking, people laughing on sidewalks, the smell of fresh bread drifting from a bakery across the street. But inside my chest, something cracked. Family can break apart quietly without raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes it unravels in a single sentence spoken in a lawyer's office when money becomes the only language left. I turned the ignition, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. Tears blurred the road ahead, but I kept driving. Driving away from the office, away from Caleb's smirk, away from the life I thought I knew. Somewhere in the industrial district, where the buildings leaned tiredly against one another, I pulled over. I looked down at the key again, its rust catching the light. My inheritance, my mystery, my burden. The last thought I remember before pulling back onto the road was this. If this garage was all I had left of Thomas, then I had to know why. And so I drove on, into the unknown, the old key clenched tight in my hand. The drive to Fairmont Avenue took me through parts of Portland I hadn't visited in years. The city I knew, the lively farmers' markets, the tree-lined neighborhoods where children rode bikes in summer, faded behind me as I moved deeper into the industrial district. The streets here were cracked and uneven, the paint on old warehouses flaking off in sheets, as if the buildings themselves were giving up. When the GPS announced I had arrived, I almost laughed. In front of me stood a squat, weather-beaten structure wedged between an abandoned paint shop and a boarded-up laundromat. The garage looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Weeds clawed up through the cracked pavement, and one of the windows was covered in plywood that sagged against rusted nails. This was it. This was what Thomas had left me. I sat in the car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel as if it could anchor me. Part of me wanted to turn around, drive back to my small apartment, and pretend this place didn't exist. But the key in my pocket pressed cold against my thigh, reminding me of the promise I had made to myself. If this was all I had left of Thomas, I had to understand why. The padlock was stiff with rust. I struggled with the key, my hands trembling, my breath misting in the cool air. At first, it wouldn't budge. I pressed harder, whispering almost angrily, "Come on, Thomas, what have you done?" Finally, with a reluctant click, the lock gave way. The heavy door groaned as I pushed it open, the hinges protesting with a screech that echoed down the empty street. A wave of smell hit me: dust, motor oil, and something metallic that clung to the back of my throat. I coughed, covering my mouth with my sleeve. The beam of late afternoon light slipped through a crack in the roof, slicing across the darkness inside. My shoes crunched over the floor, littered with tiny fragments of glass and grit. I expected chaos, piles of discarded tires, rusted tools, junk forgotten long ago. But as my eyes adjusted, I froze. It wasn't chaos at all. Everything inside was deliberate. Metal shelves lined the walls, not haphazard but neatly arranged, boxes stacked in tidy rows with handwritten labels I couldn't yet read. The floor, though dusty, was swept clear in broad paths, like someone had prepared for my arrival. A long workbench stood against the back wall, its surface covered with tools laid out in precise order, wrenches and screwdrivers arranged by size as if on display. It didn't look like abandonment. It looked like waiting. A shiver ran through me. My first thought was irrational but undeniable. Someone had known I would come. That's when I saw it, a tall metal cabinet bolted against the far wall. Its surface was scratched and dented, the kind of industrial furniture you'd expect in a mechanic's shop. But what caught my attention was the object resting on top. An envelope, yellowed at the edges, with my name written across it in Thomas's unmistakable handwriting. Charlotte. The letters curved with the same steady hand that had signed our anniversary cards, the same script he used to jot down grocery lists and love notes tucked into my purse. My knees nearly buckled. I reached out with shaking fingers, lifting the envelope as though it might vanish if I wasn't careful. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. My heart pounded, my breath uneven. Why had Thomas hidden this here? What was inside? Fear pressed against my ribs, sharp and suffocating. But beneath it pulsed something stronger, curiosity, raw and undeniable. If this garage was my inheritance, then this letter was the key to understanding why. I held the envelope close to my chest, the silence of the garage settling around me, and whispered into the stale air, "Thomas, what secret did you keep from me?" I stood there in the half-light of the garage, the envelope trembling in my hands. My name, Charlotte, written in Thomas's careful script, stared back at me. That familiar handwriting, once so comforting, now felt like a ghost reaching out of the grave. My husband had left me many notes over the years, little reminders taped to the refrigerator, birthday cards signed with his looping signature, even quick scribbles on the back of receipts when he didn't want me to forget something. But this was different. The weight of the envelope seemed heavier than paper should allow, as if it contained not just ink and words, but years of secrets pressed flat between folded sheets. I hesitated. A part of me didn't want to know. If Thomas had kept something from me for all these years, what good would it do me now? He was gone. He couldn't explain. He couldn't soften the blow. But another part of me, louder and fiercer, demanded the truth. I had buried him, yes, but perhaps not all of him. Perhaps some part of his voice still lived in this letter. With fingers stiff from both fear and the chill of the garage, I tore the flap open. The paper inside was thick, the kind Thomas always used when something mattered. My eyes blurred as I began to read. "My dearest Charlotte, if you are reading this, then my time in this world has ended, and you have found the place I meant for you to find. I need you to know, first and above all else, that nothing about this was meant to hurt you. Every decision I made, every secret I kept, I did with you in mind. You are my heart, my anchor, my reason for every choice I ever made. But I must confess something that will not be easy to hear. I built a life within a life when you never knew about, not because I doubted you, but because I doubted our son." I stopped, my hand flying to my mouth. The words swam on the page. A life within a life. The sentence cut through me, not because it was cruel, but because it was so unlike Thomas to hide anything from me. For 42 years, he had been my partner, my confidant. He told me everything from the mundane to the profound. What could he possibly have built that I hadn't seen? I forced myself to keep reading. "You have always trusted people, Charlotte. It is one of the things I loved most about you, but with Caleb, that trust has blinded you. Over the years, I watched our boy grow ambitious, hungry for status and control. I prayed it was just a phase, but the older he became, the more I saw in him a hardness I couldn't ignore. I knew if I left you and Caleb to share everything equally, he would find ways to corner you, to control you, to tell you what you could or could not do with what was yours. I could not allow that. I love our son, but I do not trust what he has become. So I left him what he believes is the valuable portion, the house, the accounts, the visible wealth. And I left you the thing he would never care to look at, a garage. To Caleb, it is worthless. To you, it is the truth. Hidden here are the pieces of a future meant only for you, a shield, a choice, a way to live the rest of your years without bending to anyone's will but your own." Tears blurred the page again. I pressed the letter to my chest, the ache in my heart nearly unbearable. Thomas had seen what I had refused to see. Caleb's dismissive comments over the years, his eye rolls when I spoke, the way he brushed past my advice, the sharpness in his voice whenever he thought I was being old-fashioned. I had excused them all. "He's busy, he's stressed, he doesn't mean it." I told myself those lies because it was easier to believe my son still respected me than to face the truth. I had become invisible in my own family. And Thomas had noticed. He had noticed when I didn't. I sank down on a wooden bench against the wall, the letter crumpling in my lap. The garage was cold, the concrete floor leaching warmth from my feet. I pulled my coat tighter, but it wasn't enough to stop the shivering. My tears fell hot against my cheeks, dripping onto the paper. How long had Thomas been planning this? How many nights had he lain awake beside me, his mind turning over these choices while I slept peacefully, believing we were united in everything? The thought made my chest ache with betrayal and love all at once. Betrayal because he hadn't shared it with me. Love because I knew he had carried this burden not to deceive me but to protect me. I thought of Caleb again, his smirk in the lawyer's office, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're too fragile to manage real assets." He had said it with such certainty, as if I were already a ghost, someone to be pitied, dismissed, and shuffled out of sight. For years, I had allowed myself to fade into the background. I had been the mother who smoothed arguments, the wife who sacrificed dreams so Thomas could build his career, the woman who cooked, cleaned, and filled photo albums with memories for everyone else. Somewhere along the way, I had accepted the role of the invisible one, as if my worth were measured only by how useful I was to others. But Thomas, my quiet, observant Thomas, had seen me. He had seen that I deserved more. He had carved out a space in this forgotten garage where I would no longer be invisible. Still, grief swallowed me whole. I clutched the letter until the edges dug into my palms. I cried until my throat burned, until the weight of the secrets and the silence pressed so heavily on me that I thought I might break apart. The garage felt like both a sanctuary and a prison. The shelves loomed around me, each box a locked mouth refusing to explain itself. The silence echoed with my sobs. I whispered Thomas's name into the air, hoping somehow he could hear me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Why did you carry this alone?" Of course, no answer came. Only the hum of distant traffic and the cold creak of the building settling in the night. Hours passed. I don't remember when exhaustion replaced grief, only that at some point I stretched out on the wooden bench, the letter clutched against my chest. The air smelled of oil and dust, the kind of scent that lingered in your hair and clothes, reminding you of where you had been. My body ached from the hard seat, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. In the half-dark, my mind churned. This place, this garage, wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. Thomas had left it to me not as an insult, not as a slight, but as a key. A puzzle box waiting for me to open it. I thought of Caleb again, of the way he had practically shoved me aside in his rush to claim the assets he believed mattered. And for the first time, I felt something other than grief. A spark of defiance lit within me. Thomas had believed I could handle this, even if he hadn't told me directly. He had given me not just a garage, but a test, a challenge, a choice to either let Caleb's words define me or to prove them wrong. I lay there on that hard bench, tears drying against my cheeks, and whispered into the shadows. This wasn't just a garage, it was a test. And for the first time since Thomas's funeral, I felt the faint stirrings of something I hadn't felt in years: resolve. Morning came slowly in the garage, though I barely slept at all. My body was stiff from the wooden bench, my eyes swollen from tears, and the air still smelled of oil and dust. Light seeped through cracks in the roof, casting pale golden stripes across the concrete floor. For a moment, I wondered if I had dreamt the letter, if Thomas's words about a life within a life had been nothing but grief-fed illusions. But then I saw the folded paper clutched in my hand, wrinkled from my restless grip. The cabinet loomed in the far corner, tall, gray, and silent. It had been there the whole time, watching me. I remembered the way the envelope had rested on top of it the night before, like a crown on a sentinel. Thomas had meant for me to find it, and if the envelope was the introduction, then the cabinet was the next chapter. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing. The door handles were thick, industrial, and locked with a heavy padlock that looked far newer than the rest of the building. My pulse quickened. I had the sense of crossing into forbidden territory, of opening something that might change everything I thought I knew about my husband. "All right, Thomas," I whispered under my breath, my voice shaky. "What else did you hide from me?" The lock resisted at first, but I had found a small rusted crowbar leaning near the workbench. I wedged it into the padlock's latch and pushed with all the strength my 67-year-old arms could muster. My muscles ached, and for a moment I thought I'd fail. But then, crack, the latch gave way with a violent snap. The cabinet doors swung open, groaning on their hinges. What I saw inside stole the air from my lungs. The shelves were filled not with tools or spare parts, but with boxes, neatly labeled, carefully stacked, each one organized in a way that spoke of deliberate planning. On the top shelf sat a bundle of faded photographs tied together with twine. On the middle shelf, manila folders bulged with documents, their corners curled with age. On the bottom shelf, rolled tubes of paper leaned against the side, blueprints. I reached for the photographs first. My hands trembled as I untied the twine. The images inside were both familiar and foreign. There was Thomas, younger, standing in front of a brick building I didn't recognize. Another showed him beside a wooden sign that read, Rosewood Orchard. He was smiling, his arm outstretched as if presenting something to me through time. There were more images of rundown storefronts, empty lots, and small-town streets I couldn't place. Confusion swirled in me. These weren't family photos, they weren't vacations or holidays. They were records, snapshots of properties, businesses, places Thomas had clearly visited but never mentioned. I set them aside and pulled a folder from the middle shelf. Inside, pages upon pages of deeds, contracts, and receipts spilled into my lap. My breath caught as I read the names of properties. An old bookstore in Salem, a corner cafe in Eugene, a dilapidated warehouse near the riverfront. My eyes widened when I saw the deed to the orchard from the photo. Rosewood Orchard, purchased by Thomas Mercer, trustee, 2016. I pressed my hand to my chest, dizzy. For years, Thomas had told me he was running errands or meeting old friends. I'd believed him, never questioning the vague excuses, but here was proof that he had spent years quietly buying forgotten properties. I whispered to the silence, "Why, Thomas, why keep this from me?" And yet, even as the sting of secrecy pricked me, another feeling stirred. Pride, admiration, maybe even awe. My husband, the man I thought I knew every corner of, had been building something behind the curtain of our everyday life. Not for himself, not for Caleb, but for me. I reached for one of the blueprint rolls and spread it across the workbench. The paper crackled as it unfolded, revealing detailed drawings of the garage itself. My eyes traced the lines, walls, beams, foundation. And then, in the corner of the page, I saw it, a square outlined in red ink, labeled storage compartment, concealed access. My breath caught. A hidden room. Inside this very garage. The blueprint marked it as being behind the far wall, the same wall where shelves of dusty boxes now stood. The thought sent a chill through me. For years, this place had stood silent, decaying from the outside, and yet within its walls lay a secret my husband had buried for me, a secret Caleb had mocked without ever bothering to check. I leaned against the workbench, the blueprint trembling in my hands. Some of the folders had bold red stamps across their covers. Confidential, for Charlotte only. My eyes lingered on those words. For Charlotte only. He had written my name. This was meant for me, not Caleb, not anyone else. Me. And yet, a part of me recoiled. How could the man who had promised me honesty keep so much hidden? I had thought we shared everything, dreams, fears, plans, but now I saw how little I'd really known. Still, love has layers. Perhaps this too was love, protective, cautious, imperfect. Maybe Thomas had known me better than I knew myself. He had seen how often I gave in, how easily I let Caleb's voice override my own. Perhaps Thomas understood that if I had known about these properties before his death, I might have let Caleb bully me into giving them away. Maybe secrecy was his last act of devotion. The thought both comforted and unsettled me. I sat there for hours, thumbing through documents, staring at photographs, tracing blueprints with my fingers as if the lines could tell me what Thomas had been thinking. The orchard deed especially tugged at me. I could almost picture it, rows of apple trees swaying in the Oregon wind, the smell of earth and blossoms, the kind of peace Thomas had always wanted for me. Had he imagined me there, tending to something alive instead of suffocating in Caleb's cold penthouse? The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Thomas had built two legacies. One public, one hidden. He had left Caleb the public face, the house, the money, the pieces easy to boast about. But he had left me the hidden heart of it all, the part that required care, courage, and patience to understand. By late afternoon, I was exhausted, my mind buzzing with more questions than answers. My husband had not been the simple man I thought. He had been layered, complicated, even secretive. And yet, as I looked around the garage filled with boxes marked with my name, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. This wasn't an insult. It wasn't a punishment. It was a puzzle, a trust, a path laid carefully in shadows. And if Thomas had believed I was strong enough to solve it, then perhaps I was. I stood before the wall marked on the blueprint, running my hand over the dusty shelves. Somewhere behind this barrier, a hidden compartment waited. My husband's final secret, my inheritance, my test. The thought made me shiver, not from fear this time, but from anticipation. I stood in front of the shelving like a pilgrim at a sealed door, blueprint trembling in my fingers. In black ink, Thomas had drawn a clean red square where no square should be, storage compartment, concealed access. The words pulsed in my head like a heartbeat. The shelves in front of me looked ordinary enough. Dented metal uprights, plywood planks bowed by time, a congregation of dusty boxes and coffee cans that had forgotten their labels. But the blueprint insisted there was more. And after everything I'd read, I believed it. "All right," I murmured, voice scratchy from a sleepless night, "show me." I started by lifting the top row of boxes to the workbench, coughing as powdery dust rose in tremors. Every motion felt like an intrusion and an invitation, breaking into my husband's secret, stepping into the life he'd drawn in the margins. When the top shelf cleared, I found an odd detail I would have missed yesterday. The shelf brackets weren't screwed into the studs. They were hooked. Someone had designed these to lift free. I slid the first plank forward. It came away easier than I expected, light with dry rot and old air. The second and third followed, until a ribcage of empty metal supports gaped back at me. I pushed the supports aside, one by one, and they folded like a room divider. Beneath them, the concrete at the base of the wall had a faint seam, too straight to be an accident. My palms were slick. I wiped them on my jeans, then pressed my fingers along the painted cinder block. A section rang dull under my knuckles. I pushed there, then again, lower. Somewhere a hidden magnet clicked, and a panel, 2 cinder blocks wide, 3 high, popped outward barely half an inch. I don't know how long I just stood there, staring at that thin line of shadow. I was 67 years old and about to crawl into a hidden compartment my dead husband had built. It would have been funny if it hadn't felt like a sacrament. I slid the panel the rest of the way. Cold air exhaled from the darkness, carrying a smell older than the garage itself. Cedar, paper, and iron. The cavity wasn't large, maybe 8 feet across, 4 feet deep, height a little shorter than the ceiling, but it was packed wall to wall with sealed wooden crates. Each crate was the color of the inside of a violin, edges clean, stenciled numbers in a tidy hand I recognized as Thomas's. There was also a narrow path left between them, just wide enough for a woman my size to step in and turn around. "Thomas," I whispered, half prayer, half accusation. A flashlight lay on the workbench. I clicked it on and set the beam low, careful not to blind myself in tight quarters. The light landed on the first crate, RM07, fragile, glass/frame. The next, RM12, ledgers a D. Lower down, RM03, ceramic handle with care. I noticed the screws on the lids were new, but the wood beneath showed years of handling. None of this was improvised. It had been prepared, packed, and God help me curated. I fetched a driver from the pegboard, sat cross-legged on the cold floor, and began to unscrew the lid of RM12. 4 screws, 8, 12. The lid came away, and the smell of old paper rose up, sweet and dry, like a library that had been sealed for winter. Inside were books as thick as my hand, their spines labeled in pencil. Acquisitions 2015-2017, maintenance and insurance, dispositions, appraisals, preliminary. Thomas's tight, compact handwriting marched across the margins, dates, notes, cross-references. This was his mind on paper. This was the missing half of our marriage spreadsheet. I lifted one ledger and flipped slowly. Names of places I'd never heard of wetted the pages. Dovetail Books, Salem, Sequoia and Vine Cafe, Eugene, Rosewood Orchard, Yamhill County. Sums written in a neat column. Notes like owner wants to retire, inventory undervalued. Or roof work deferred, bid attached. Or, piercingly, Charlotte would love the quiet here. The flashlight shook in my hand. He had been writing to me inside these books, as surely as if he'd addressed every page to my name. I set the ledger down carefully and opened RM07. The first thing I saw was brown paper, scored with string in a tidy X. Beneath it, bubble wrap whispered like tissue at a birthday party. I peeled back a corner and saw the edge of a gilded frame, the gold leaf worn soft by time. I freed the rest and held up a painting the size of a window. Even under the dust, the colors burned. A coastal landscape, ochre cliffs, and a sky like milk glass. The Pacific hammered into sheets of pewter. In the corner, a discreet signature in a hand I didn't recognize. I didn't know art values, but the frame alone felt expensive in the unshowy way money wears when it's been around a while. My heart stuttered. The garage, the cabinet, the hidden compartment, he hadn't only bought properties. He'd acquired objects meant to outlive us. Things of beauty, yes, but also what the ledgers called hard stores of value. That sounded like Thomas. Poetry wrapped in a spreadsheet. I leaned the painting safe against the inside wall and reached for RM03. The weight told me this one wasn't a guess. Inside, straw packing cushioned a ceramic vessel the color of rainwater. Simple, perfect lines. A soft belly narrowing to a throat, glaze pooled at the base like a quiet tide. It looked like something that should live on a table with fruit under a morning sun. I traced the rim with a fingertip, and the electric current that ran through me was grief and pride in equal measure. My husband had been building a world, and I'd been living next to it without seeing. I set the vessel down and lifted a shorter crate marked RM01 Personal. My hands knew before my eyes did this was different. Inside, wrapped in a wool scarf I recognized from winters long ago, lay a stack of photographs bound with a ribbon. On top was our wedding picture. Thomas in a narrow tie and morals older than his suit. Me in a dress I sewed with my mother, looking like I believed mornings would always smell like gardenias. His hand rested on my waist, but his eyes were fixed on me, as if he'd been caught mid-promise. Tucked behind it, a smaller photograph, the two of us on a roadside somewhere, hair whipped wild by wind, my feet bare on the hood of a car that ran like a sewing machine until it didn't. Someone had written on the back, when we were new. I pressed that second photograph to my lips. The crates around me blurred. In all those years of grocery lists and mortgage payments, of graduations and arguments about the thermostat, had Thomas been keeping a corner of himself that was always turning toward me? Had he packed not only objects and ledgers, but our actual youth, sanctified and stored against a winter he knew would come? For a long time I didn't open any more crates. I sat in the space he built with my name on the covers of things and let the weight of it all settle into my bones. Love, it turned out, could be loud, the laughter at dinner parties, the shared glances across rooms, but it could also be quiet and inventory-shaped. It could be a list of serial numbers and insurance riders and climate notes in a margin that read, "Keep cool, she hates the heat." It could be a man's tired hands learning how to cradle a vase like a newborn and a painting like a window. I should have felt only betrayed by the secrecy. But the betrayal wouldn't sit still. It kept sliding into tenderness, into a kind of awe. He hadn't hidden his life from me to keep me out. He'd hidden it like a bird hides grain, against the lean days, against the predators that circle what's soft. Still, fear found a way in. It always does. If I had found this room, who else might? The panel, ingenious as it was, wasn't magic. The garage door had a stubborn lock, but stubborn locks rust and men like Caleb did not. He'd already dismissed the place as junk, but entitlement has a way of learning new words when money is involved. If he learned about the orchard, about any of it, would this quiet room be safe from his impatience, his conviction that he knew best? The thought of my son in this space, that hurried, appraising gaze, those hands on these ledgers, that mouth shaping orders he'd expect me to obey, pinched something in my chest until I had to put the photos down or risk crumpling them. I flipped open one more ledger, needing to steady myself with paper. On the inside cover, Thomas had written a simple index, and beneath it, in smaller letters, "If you are scared, call Grace first." A phone number followed. Grace Alcott. We'd volunteered together at a community center years back. She'd been a lawyer before retiring into a life of courtroom war stories and lemon bars. I hadn't thought about her in months. Thomas had. He'd left me a person alongside the objects, a map and a guide. I exhaled, long and shuddering. So he hadn't just imagined me standing here, he'd imagined the next step I'd be too shaken to think through. The flashlight guttered, and I tapped it until the beam returned. The afternoon light from the high windows had thinned to the color of old coins. I carefully restored what I'd opened. Lids screwed back down, straw tucked, scarf wrapped. I slid the personal crate to the front of the little aisle and placed the wedding photo on top for a moment longer, just to see his eyes fixed on me the way they had in a world that still smelled like gardenias. "Thank you," I said aloud. Not to the garage, not to the objects, but to the man who had decided my worth was worth hiding for. I reset the panel, swung the folding supports back, and set the shelves in place. Dust settled in a soft hiss. From the outside, the wall was just a wall again. Only I knew where it bent. Before I left the compartment for good, I took one thing. A single ledger labeled Acquisitions 2015-2017. I slid it into my bag along with the wedding photo and Thomas's letter. If the worst happened, if someone forced the lock, if Caleb hired men with crowbars and clipboards, I would at least hold the story in my hands. As night pressed against the high windows, I stood in the middle of the garage and listened. Portland's industrial district had its own nocturne, distant tires hissing on wet pavement, a far-off train stitching the city's edges together, a gull that hadn't learned it didn't live by the sea. I thought of the orchard deed, of rows of trees that would be almost leafless now, of the way moonlight falls differently on fruit than on metal. Somewhere in the ledgers Thomas had written, "First pressing, late September if weather holds." I tried to remember if last September had been wet or dry. I tried to remember how many Septembers I'd spent in kitchens instead of fields. I checked the metal door twice, then a third time, then finally locked the padlock until it bit. I walked to my car with the ledger hugged to my chest, the way I used to carry my sleeping son from the back seat to his bed, forehead pressed to his hair, whispering nonsense to keep him in the dream. Before turning the key in the ignition, I powered my phone and scrolled to contacts. Grace Alcott. I hadn't called in years. I saved the number Thomas had written anyway, typing it in as Grace Thomas said call. The label looked strange and right, both at once. Headlights carved a tunnel through the dark as I pulled away from the curb. In the rear view, the garage shrank until it was just another square of black between other squares of black. But I knew what it held, and the knowledge made me taller in my seat. At the first red light, A fear skittered across my mind so fast I almost missed it. How long until Caleb decides to be curious? He had left the lawyer's office with the swagger of a man who believed the world had rolled out a red carpet in his name. But swagger isn't the same as security. And when swagger meets a wall, it starts asking questions. If those questions ever turned toward Fairmont Avenue, I would have to be ready. The light changed. I drove on, the map of my husband's secret world opening in me like a book I didn't know I could read. The pages were heavy, the margins full, the binding strong. And somewhere between fear and gratitude, I understood something that would change the way I told our story, even to myself. Thomas hadn't hidden this room from me. He'd hidden it for me. And now it was my turn to decide what kind of woman emerged from behind the wall he built. With trembling hands, yes, but hands that could learn to be steady. I tightened my grip on the wheel and spoke into the quiet car, as if Caleb or the night or the ledger itself needed to hear me. I know what this is now, and I won't let anyone take it from me. The knock came just after dusk, sharp and impatient, like a fist wasn't asking permission but announcing authority. I froze in my little apartment's kitchenette, a half-cooked pot of pasta steaming on the stove. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be a neighbor or the landlord, but deep down I knew. When I opened the door, there he was, Caleb, my son, my only child. His silhouette filled the frame, sharp suit still on from work, tie loosened. The air around him charged with the kind of restlessness that always preceded a fight. "Mom," he said flatly, brushing past me before I could invite him in. He didn't kiss my cheek, he didn't even make eye contact. He simply set his leather briefcase on my coffee table as if my home were an office he had come to commandeer. "Caleb," I managed, closing the door softly behind him. "This is a surprise." He laughed once, a humorless sound. "I'll get to the point. The garage, I need you to sign over your rights. The lawyer said it's technically yours, but we both know you don't have the resources to manage property. I can liquidate the junk inside and at least put some cash to good use." My chest tightened. The garage, he'd come for it already. I swallowed, playing dumb. "Junk." He waved his hand dismissively as though the subject bored him already. "Rusty tools, moldy walls, whatever Dad was tinkering with down there. It's a money pit, but if I act quickly, I can flip the land for development. There's interest from a small firm." I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "Caleb, your father left that garage to me. He must have had his reasons." His mouth tightened, his jaw set in a way I remembered from his teenage years, right before he'd slam his bedroom door. "Reasons? Mom, let's be honest. Dad wasn't thinking straight near the end. He should have left everything under my management. You can't keep up with complicated decisions anymore. You forget things. He paused, searching for a word he thought would hurt the least but still land the blow, fragile. The word hit harder than I expected. Fragile. Like porcelain, like something to be wrapped and put away, not trusted, not useful. I saw in him not just the man he had become, but the boy I had raised. The boy whose scraped knees I had kissed clean. The boy whose homework I stayed up late to check even when my eyes burned from exhaustion. The boy who once clung to me at night after a nightmare, whispering, "Don't let go, Mom." And now here he stood, a man hardened by greed, by entitlement, speaking to me like a burden to be managed. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry, not this time. "Caleb," I said softly but firmly, "I'm not signing anything." His head snapped up, his expression startled. For a moment, he looked at me as though he'd misheard. "Excuse me." I said no, I repeated, straighter now, my fingers releasing the chair. My voice didn't shake. "I won't sign over the garage. Your father left it to me and it stays with me." Color rose in his cheeks. He slammed his palm against the coffee table, making his briefcase jump. "Do you even hear yourself? You don't know what you're sitting on. You can't possibly understand the paperwork, the taxes, the liability. This is exactly why Dad should have left everything to me. You're going to waste it." I held his gaze, and for the first time in years, I didn't lower my eyes. "It isn't yours to waste or to save. It's mine, and I will handle it in my own way. Silence stretched. His breathing was fast, his anger filling the small room like smoke. I saw it then, my son's true face. The mask of charm and ambition stripped away, leaving only the sharp bones of entitlement and disdain. Finally, he grabbed his briefcase and yanked the zipper closed with a violent pull. Fine, he spat, but don't come to me when you're drowning in bills you can't understand. Don't expect me to clean up your mess. He stormed to the door, yanked it open, and slammed it behind him with such force that the frame rattled. The sound echoed down the hall long after his footsteps faded. The pasta on the stove had boiled over, hissing angrily onto the burner, but I didn't move. I stood there, hands trembling, heart pounding, staring at the closed door. And then, slowly, my shoulders straightened. For once, I whispered into the empty room, voice breaking with equal parts grief and pride. I wasn't afraid of my own child. I sank into the chair, shaking, but somewhere deep inside me, a flame flickered to life. Small, fragile maybe, but mine. I stared at the door long after Caleb's footsteps had vanished down the hall, the echo of his anger still trembling in the air like smoke after a fire. My son, the boy I once held against my chest when he was feverish, the man I once believed would carry his father's kindness forward, had left me shaking but not broken. I whispered again, almost as if to remind myself, for once I wasn't afraid. But courage, I quickly realized, is not enough when papers, debts, and hidden wealth circle your name. Thomas had left me more than crates and secrets. He had left me a battlefield. And if Caleb suspected what lay inside the garage walls, he would stop at nothing to tear it from me. That night, long after I turned off the stove and scraped the boiled-over pasta into the trash, I sat at my small kitchen table with Thomas's letter, the ledger I had stolen from the compartment, and my phone. My fingers hovered over the number scrawled in his careful handwriting, Grace Alcott, Grace. I hadn't spoken her name aloud in years. We'd spent 2 summers volunteering together at a community center, helping children with their reading. She'd been sharp then, her humor quick, her gaze unflinching, her hands steady even as age softened the skin around her knuckles. A retired attorney, she'd told me once. She had known how to listen, really listen, in a way that made you feel braver simply for being heard. If Thomas had written her name, he must have trusted her. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then, Evelyn. Her voice was husky, aged but unmistakable. Grace, I whispered as though her name might dissolve if I spoke it too loud. It's me. I need help. Silence hummed for only a heartbeat before her voice softened. Thomas said one day you might. Why don't you come by tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock? Bring whatever you've found. The next morning, I drove across Portland to a quiet neighborhood where ivy curled around old brick homes and the sidewalks smelled of damp earth. Grace's house was small but dignified, lined with bookshelves visible through the wide front windows. She greeted me at the door in a cardigan the color of storm clouds, her silver hair pulled into a bun that made her eyes sharper somehow. "You look like a woman who hasn't slept in days," she said, ushering me in. "I haven't," I admitted. She led me to a kitchen table already laid with 2 mugs and a pot of tea. As I unpacked the ledger and Thomas's letter, my hands trembled, but her steady gaze anchored me. I poured it all out, the garage, the crates, Caleb's demand, my fear and my pride tangled like vines. She listened without interrupting, fingers steepled under her chin. When I finished, she nodded once slow. Thomas was clever, very clever, but clever plans need guardians, and that's where you come in. "Grace," I said, my throat tight, "I don't know if I'm strong enough or smart enough. I don't even understand half the words in these documents." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Evelyn, listen to me. Society loves to pretend women our age are invisible. Too fragile, too forgetful, too dependent. But I've watched you at that community center, patient with children who no one else could reach. That is strength. what you don't know. You can learn, line by line, contract by contract. That's how law works, that's how survival works. Her words cracked something open inside me. For years, Caleb had told me I was too soft, too naive. Thomas had loved me, but even he had shielded me from finances, quietly keeping this second life hidden. And yet here was Grace, reminding me that invisibility was a trick, not a truth. I can't do this alone, I admitted. You won't. Grace's eyes gleamed. I know a man, a financial advisor I trust, retired like me but still sharp. His name is Richard Hale. He'll sit with you, explain the pieces, no nonsense, no condescension. He's helped other widows untangle the messes their husbands left. Mess, I repeated softly, my fingers brushing the ledger. Thomas didn't leave a mess, he left a maze. And we'll find the way through, she said firmly. That afternoon, Grace introduced me to Richard Hale in his modest downtown office. He was tall, stooped slightly with age, but his handshake was warm and his eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore no flashy watch, no polished cufflinks, just a simple navy sweater and the air of a man who valued numbers more than appearances. Mrs. Mercer, he said, motioning me into a chair across from his desk, Grace tells me you've inherited something unconventional. I laughed, though my voice shook. That's one word for it. Together, we spread Thomas's ledger and letter across the desk. Richard adjusted his glasses and began flipping through the pages. He hummed thoughtfully, nodding occasionally. Properties, he said at last. Small, scattered, some businesses, some land. Interesting, he wasn't just buying at random, he was diversifying. I blinked. Diversifying. Balancing risk, he explained patiently. If one property loses value, another holds steady or gains. See here, the orchard agriculture, the bookstore cultural asset, the warehouse industrial. He was building a safety net. Line by line, he translated the documents into words I could understand. He showed me how some properties were already generating quiet streams of income. The cafe in Eugene had tenants who paid rent each month. The bookstore had been leased to a local collective. Even the orchard, though modest, sold apples and cider through seasonal contracts. I felt my breath lighten, as if I had been holding it for weeks. Income, not just dusty buildings, but life, flowing toward me quietly, invisibly, but the relief didn't last. Richard tapped one page with his pen. Here's the concern, this warehouse, it's leveraged, a loan tied to it. Nothing too heavy yet, but if someone like your son discovered it, he could argue financial mismanagement. He could try to pressure you into selling, or worse, move legally to claim he's protecting family assets. My stomach clenched. So Caleb could use the debts against me. Yes, Richard said simply, which is why you need to protect your position now. File the proper claims, lock the titles, and make sure any correspondence goes through legal counsel, not directly to you. You don't want him cornering you in your apartment again. The truth of that landed heavy. I thought of Caleb's sneer, the way he had called me fragile, the way his anger filled the room like fire. Grace, seated beside me, placed a steady hand on my arm. You see, Evelyn, you're not powerless, you just need the right shields. Something shifted in me then. The woman who had whispered in her apartment, for once I wasn't afraid, leaned forward across the polished desk. Then show me how to build those shields. For the next 2 hours, Richard walked me through the first steps, drafting a power of attorney that gave no access to Caleb, setting up a trust to manage the properties under my sole discretion, and listing Grace as my emergency contact for legal correspondence. I wrote notes furiously, my handwriting cramped, my fingers aching, but I understood, line by line, contract by contract. By the end of the meeting, a strange sensation filled me, not joy exactly, but something sturdier, confidence. The kind I hadn't felt since before Thomas got sick. That evening, back in my apartment, I sat again at the kitchen table with the phone in front of me. Caleb's number glared at me from the recent calls list, but I scrolled past it. Instead, I dialed a different one, an accountant Thomas had once mentioned in passing, a man named Eric Foster whose name had appeared in the ledgers. The phone rang. A voice answered, calm, professional. "This is Eric." I swallowed hard, straightened my back, and said clearly, "Mr. Foster, my name is Evelyn Mercer. I'm calling regarding the accounts my husband, Thomas Mercer, left under my name. I'd like to set a meeting to review them." There was a pause on the other end, then a respectful tone. "Of course, Mrs. Mercer, when are you available?" As I hung up, my hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from something sharper, steadier. For the first time since the will had been read, I had made a decision not in Caleb's shadow, not in Thomas's memory, but in my own voice. I whispered into the quiet room, words meant only for myself, "This is mine, and I will not be erased." The road to Yamhill County rolled out like a ribbon through hills the color of sleeping wheat. I drove with the window cracked, letting in air that smelled faintly of rain and cedar. Richard's notes sat in the passenger seat under a paperweight of coffee in a lidded cup, their corners softened by my rereading. Rosewood Orchard, acquired 2016, seasonal contracts, modest but steady, numbers and margins. Facts I could carry without crying. The last turn was a gravel lane flanked by alder and wild rose, the kind of road you find by accident and then never forget. A hand-painted sign, Rosewood, leaned on an old post, letters faded the way good things fade from use and sun. I pulled in and killed the engine. Silence isn't really silent out here, it thrums. Bees, wind, a jay scolding from a fir. A man stepped from the shade of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, 3/4 of a smile already in place. He was in his late 50s, sturdy in the way of people who carry crates more than they carry briefcases. A brimmed hat threw his eyes into shadow until he tipped it back. "You must be Mrs. Mercer," he said, voice warm, a little surprised. "I'm Miguel, been waiting to meet you a long time." I laughed before I could help it. "Waiting? I only learned this place existed a few days ago." He nodded like that fit perfectly well. "He said you'd come when it was time." Second I couldn't breathe. "Thomas used to come here." Miguel's smile softened into something like respect. "Often, quiet like. Never stayed long. He walked the rows, took off his watch like it bothered him out here. Brought me thermoses in winter. He asked me to plant some new saplings along the east fence." Miguel pointed toward a gentle slope where a line of younger trees shone a paler green than the rest. "Told me their names, even." "Their names?" He shrugged. "People name boats, why not trees?" Said these were for you. "Charlotte's Freedom," he added shyly as though repeating a private joke. He called that strip your garden of freedom. I thought it was a nice line. Something in me loosened, painful and sweet. "Garden of Freedom," I repeated, tasting the words. Thomas had been planting my freedom while I was counting pills and appointments, asking him if he'd eaten enough, if he'd slept. He'd been out here making a future with roots. We walked the first row together, his boots sure on the damp earth, my flats sinking just enough to make me feel like a child on grown-up ground. The trees were heavy with fruit, skin flushed gold-green and kissed by red where the sun found them. Miguel stopped under one and reached up with the confidence of a man who's done this thousands of times. He twisted, the apple surrendered, and he rubbed it once on his sleeve before handing it to me. "First of the rows that were his favorites," he said. "Liberty, good keepers." I cradled it for a breath. The skin was cool, I bit in. The snap filled my head, sweet traveling across my tongue, tart right behind it like the feeling when you get a thing almost right. Juice slicked my fingers. I closed my eyes. You'd think an apple is an apple until you eat the one someone planted for you on purpose. We sat on an overturned crate by the barn, while he told me stories I hadn't known I needed. How Thomas always parked in the same spot near the willow, how he knelt once to tie a boy's shoe at the Saturday market when the parents' hands were full of bags, how he laughed so quietly you only noticed because his shoulders moved. How he'd stand at the east fence and watch the light shift down the trees like prayer. He didn't brag, Miguel said, not like some who buy land to own it. He bought this to belong to it, I think. Always asked what you would like. Once he brought me a scrap of paper with a sketch. A bench under those new ones. Wanted a place for you to sit when you came. I looked to the east fence. There was a bench there, simple and wide, made from old orchard planks, weathered, sanded, smooth. I walked to it and pressed my palm to the wood. It was warm. I sat, and the view arranged itself. A lane of young trees marching toward the far ridge. Beyond them, older rows stitched in neat green. Beyond that, sky. Peace isn't a concept here, it's geometry. Why didn't he tell me? I asked the air, the bench, the man who wasn't here to answer. Miguel tucked his rag into his back pocket. Some men believe love is better proved than spoken, he said gently. He said you carried enough. He said this was the one thing he didn't want anyone taking from you. The words lodged under my breastbone. For months, my goodbyes had been hospital white and monitor green, that beeping that inserts itself into dreams. Here, the farewell he'd been writing was apples and shade, and a bench that fit the exact width of my loneliness. Miguel walked me through the small packing shed, the cold room that breathed fog when he opened the door, the ledger where seasonal buyers signed in pencil that smudged. He showed me the drip lines Thomas had paid for. Less waste, better fruit, and the irrigation map, and the old wind machine that he swore had a personality. On a nail by the door hung a nail apron with 3 stubby pencils and a folded paper tucked behind them. Miguel plucked it free and handed it to me without ceremony. Found this last week, he said. Figured it might be for you. It was a list in Thomas's neat script. Call Grace if Charlotte is scared. Bench delivered next Thursday. Tell Miguel to sand edges twice. East fence, Charlotte's freedom, plant 6 more in spring if she likes it here. At the bottom, in smaller letters, teach her to prune in February. She likes learning with her hands. I held the paper the way you hold a baby you once knew and haven't seen in years, careful, astonished by the weight of remembering. He knew me, I said. It sounded like a discovery. You can tell a man by the way he talks about his wife when no one's grading him, Miguel said. He talked like the world should be making more room for you. We ate lunch at a plank table under a corrugated awning that made the light gentler. Bread Miguel's sister had baked, cheese that got softer while we talked, a jar of last year's applesauce that tasted like late September. He asked if I had kids, and I said a son, in the voice that carries a whole life and a recent fight. He didn't press. Good men don't pry at wounds they can see. After, we walked the eastern edge again. I traced the bark of the young trees with 2 fingers. Each had a tag tied loosely in twine. Most were varieties. On 3, the twine held something else, a thin sliver of wood burned with letters. C, first light, C, after rain, C, go easy. Miguel noticed where I paused. Those were the first ones, he said. He was feeling poetic that day. Thomas, poetic, I murmured, smiling for real. We were nearly back at the barn when Miguel's smile thinned and he glanced toward the lane. There's something you should know, he said, voice dropping into the register men use when they don't want to scare you but need to. A man came by 2 days ago. City shoes. Too clean for here. Asked questions that didn't fit his mouth. My stomach tightened. Caleb, he didn't say, said he was reviewing holdings on behalf of the Mercer family. Wanted to see contracts. Asked if there were liens, water rights, whether you'd considered consolidation under a single manager. Miguel folded his arms, the rag peeking from his pocket like a flag of truce. I told him he should talk to the owner. He said, and this is the part you won't like, that the owner was elderly and overwhelmed and that he was streamlining the estate. Heat rose up my neck so fast I tasted copper. Elderly and overwhelmed. The exact words men like to use to grease skids under women like me. Did he say anything else? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Miguel rubbed his jaw. He said if we cooperated, things would go easier. I told him we only cooperate with names on papers and kindness in voices. He left his card. Miguel handed it over, a tasteful font. A number I recognized, the downtown exchange near Caleb's office. Not my son's name, an assistant's. I slid the card into my bag with the folded list and the nail apron pencils. Thank you for not giving him anything. Miguel shrugged, a quiet, stubborn gesture. This place was promised differently. We stood in a companionable silence, broken only by a wind shift that made the leaves show their paler undersides. There's a sound apple leaves make just before a storm, like 1,000 small hands turning a page at once. It wasn't storming, it was only the air reminding me that changes come even when you think you've accounted for them. I'll need to shore up the paperwork, I said, half to him, half to the trees. Title locks, notices, maybe a posted sign about inquiries going through council. I heard Richard's careful voice in my head, Grace's steadier one under it, like harmony. Miguel nodded. You tell me what to post and where, and I'll make it look official. Folks respect a sign on a post more than a letter in an envelope. We walked to the bench one last time. I sat. He stood, hat in his hands, as if the bench were a pew and I had the floor. Do you want me to pick for you? He asked. A crate of the early ones, labeled. I can send them to your apartment, or you can take them with you if you've got the heart for carrying. I pictured my little kitchen with its 2 good plates and the yellow bowl with a chip on the rim, a crate of apples on the counter catching afternoon light, the room changing shape around them. I'll take them, I said. I want the carrying. He smiled the way men smile when they approve without needing to say it. He loaded the crate into the trunk, nestling it so it wouldn't shift. When we shook hands, his palm was rough and absolutely certain. On the drive back, orchard smell traveled with me, leaves, sugar, a hint of dust. At a red light, I reached behind me, took one apple, and placed it on the passenger seat where Richard's notes lay, an ordinary abundance. A small, perfect claim. At home, I set the crate on the counter and washed one apple under the tap just because I could, because some rituals are for no one but you. Then I dried my hands, pulled out my phone, and scrolled past Caleb's number to the ones that mattered. First, Grace, he's sniffing around, I said when she answered. Send me the wording you like for a sign and the letterhead for a cease and desist. Then, Richard, we need to lock titles on Rosewood and the warehouse. Also, I want automatic notices for any third-party inquiries. No one talks to me without going through counsel. 2 calls. 2 firm voices coming back with plans. The kind of plans that turn fear into lines on paper. I carried an apple to the window and watched the last light leave the buildings across the street. For months, I'd thought Thomas's last gift was wealth hidden in boxes. Today, I knew better. He'd also hidden peace for me and dignity, and a place where my name was spoken without apology. He'd planted them. He'd watered them. He'd asked a man I'd never met to wait with them until I was ready to come home. I bit into the apple and let the juice run down my wrist. I'm ready, I said to the glass, to the trees miles away, to the man who had believed I would be eventually. And then, because readiness is not a feeling but an action, I wrote a 3rd number, one I had been avoiding, and pressed call. Caleb, I said when he picked up. If you want to discuss my holdings, you'll do it with my attorney on the line, not at my door, not again. He started to speak. I ended the call. My heart pounded, but it didn't shake. Behind me, on the table, Thomas's list lay beside a small nail apron and 3 pencils. I slid one into my pocket. February would come. I'd learn to prune. I'd learn all of it, line by line, cut by cut, leaving what must live, letting go what must go. The orchard was quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. Dew clung to the grass like tiny lanterns, and the air smelled of wet leaves and faint sweetness from the apples ripening on the trees. I had come early, hoping for a few moments of peace on the bench Thomas had built for me. My garden of freedom, Miguel called it. But peace never lasts when greed is hunting you. I heard the crunch of gravel first, a car pulling into the lane too fast, tires spitting stones. My chest tightened before I even saw him. Caleb. He slammed his door shut and strode toward me, his suit jacket flapping behind him like a cape of anger. His face was sharp with accusation, lips pressed so tight the color drained from them. He didn't greet me. He didn't even look at the orchard. He looked at me like I was an obstacle to be bulldozed. "So this is it," he spat, sweeping his arm toward the trees. "This is what you've been hiding from me." I stood slowly from the bench, pressing my hands against the wood to steady myself. "Caleb, lower your voice. This is a place of—" "Don't," he snapped, pointing a finger at me as though I were a defendant in court. "Don't try to shame me with your sanctimonious act. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to hear from other people about properties I should have inherited? To find out my own mother has been sneaking around, keeping secrets from me." Miguel appeared from the barn, wiping his hands on his rag, his jaw tight. "Sir," he said evenly, "this land belongs to your mother. You need to watch your tone." Caleb rounded on him, eyes flashing. "Stay out of this. This is family business." Miguel didn't flinch. He only folded his arms, wide and steady as the barn behind him. I stepped between them, my heart thudding against my ribs. "Caleb, listen to yourself. This isn't about humiliation. This is about what your father chose. He left this place to me." He laughed, harsh and bitter. He was old. He wasn't thinking clearly. "You don't even know what you're sitting on, do you? Do you even understand the value of the assets you're hoarding?" I felt the sting of his words, but not like before. Not as a mother shrinking under her son's scorn. This time I saw him clearly, not the boy with skinned knees, not the teenager slamming doors, not the man in a tailored suit who once kissed my cheek at Christmas out of habit. I saw him for what he was, a man consumed, a man who could no longer see his mother as anything but a gatekeeper to something he wanted. "Caleb," I said softly, my voice steadier than I expected, "I have spent my life loving you, protecting you, believing in you. But this obsession with getting more, with taking what isn't yours, this is not the boy I raised. This is not my son." His jaw worked, fury flashing across his face. "I'm only asking for what's mine." "No," I corrected, my voice rising now. "You're demanding what was never yours to begin with. Your father trusted me, not you. That's all you need to know." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the wind. Caleb's chest heaved, his fists clenched at his sides. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but it vanished, swallowed by rage. "You think you can stop me?" he hissed. "You're old, you're weak, and you're out of your depth. I will get everything back, every last piece. And when I do, you'll wish you'd listened to me." He turned sharply, his shoes crunching against the gravel as he stalked back to his car. The door slammed, the engine roared, and then he was gone, leaving the orchard shivering in his wake. I stood rooted to the ground, my hands trembling, my body heavy as if I'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Miguel touched my shoulder lightly. "He can't touch this without papers," he said quietly. "Don't let him scare you." But my fear wasn't just of papers or contracts. It was of the ghost of my son, the boy I had loved so fiercely, the boy who seemed buried now beneath greed and entitlement. For the first time, I admitted to myself that maybe I couldn't save him, not from the world, not from himself. And yet, as I looked out over the rows of trees Thomas had planted, I felt resolve take root. Caleb could storm and threaten all he wanted, but this land, this legacy, had been entrusted to me. I whispered into the orchard air, steadying my voice with every word. "Your father trusted me, not you. That's all you need to know." The words felt like armor, fragile but real. And I knew, even shaken, even heartbroken, I would not give in. The night after Caleb stormed away from the orchard, I couldn't sleep. His threats echoed in my ears, sharper than the crickets outside my window. "I will get everything back." Those words clung to me, not because I believed him, but because I finally understood how far he might go. Greed can strip a person of tenderness, of decency, even of family. But fear had done enough damage to my life already. It had silenced me in the lawyer's office, made me doubt my own judgment, and left me trembling when my son raised his voice. I decided that night I would not spend whatever years I had left waiting for someone else to fight for me, so I cleared my kitchen table. I spread Thomas's ledgers, the crates of documents, and the blueprint maps I'd carried home from the garage. I stacked them like puzzle pieces around me, and with a yellow legal pad and a pen in hand, I began. At first, it was overwhelming. Numbers blurred, terms twisted, legal phrases stared at me with smug indifference. Lienholder, beneficiary clause, deferred equity. These were words Caleb would have thrown like stones at me, proof of my supposed ignorance. But I thought of Grace's voice, line by line, contract by contract, so that's what I did. I took it slow. I made 3 columns: properties owned, income streams, and potential risks. One by one, I pulled each folder apart, reading every deed, every receipt, every note Thomas had scribbled in the margins. I discovered a rhythm in the work. The bookstore lease payments went into a small credit union account. The cafe contract included a renewal clause I circled in red ink. The warehouse, my weak link, had a loan attached with quarterly interest that could draw Caleb's attention if I didn't secure it fast. And with every small victory, every page I translated into something I could understand, I felt something shift inside me. Confidence, cautious but steady. By noon the next day, I had completed what I began to call my map. A complete picture of Thomas's hidden world. 10 properties, 4 producing income, 3 requiring maintenance, 2 saddled with manageable debt, and 1 orchard that gave me not only apples but a reason to keep going. I stared at the map, pride welling in my chest. For the first time in decades, I wasn't asking permission, wasn't waiting for a man, husband or son, to explain the rules. I was making the rules myself. It struck me then how women of my generation were raised. We were taught to marry well, to support, to nurture, to sacrifice. Dependence wasn't just expected, it was baked into us like yeast in bread. And I had followed the recipe faithfully until life demanded otherwise. But survival, I realized, is its own teacher. Widowhood, betrayal, secrets, they had all forced me into independence. And here I was, learning line by line, contract by contract, who I could be when no one else was steering. That night, as I tucked away the ledgers, I found one folder hidden beneath a pile I hadn't touched yet. The handwriting on the label made my breath catch. Thomas's script, clear and deliberate. Legacy fund. I carried it to the table, my hands trembling. Inside was a slim binder, sealed envelopes, and a typed instruction sheet. At the top, in bold letters, "For Charlotte only when she is ready." I read, my eyes wide, my throat dry. This account is not for property. It is not for debt. It is not for Caleb. It is not for anyone but you. I set it aside so that when the time comes you may choose, not what I wanted, not what the world demanded, but what you dream. If your dream is to travel, use it. If it is to build, use it. If it is to rest, use it. It is yours, no explanations, no compromises. Legacy to me was never money, it was freedom. And this is my last gift to you. At the bottom was a set of numbers, an account at a bank I recognized. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the page. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't only from grief. For years I had been invisible, doubted, dismissed. Now here was proof that Thomas had never doubted me at all. He had trusted me with something he hadn't even trusted himself, the right to choose. I pressed the folder to my chest, whispering through the tears, "Thomas, you still believed in me." The next morning, with Grace's guidance, I filed papers to secure every deed. I met with Richard to lock down accounts. We moved the orchard income into a trust only I could authorize. And then, my first true step into independence, I called the bank listed on the legacy fund instructions. My voice was calm, steady. "I'd like to review an account," I told the clerk. "Yes, under my name." It was a small act, but to me it was a revolution. For once, I wasn't managing Thomas's wishes. I wasn't fending off Caleb's demands. I was choosing my own strength. And deep down, I knew the next battle was coming. Caleb would not let this go. But when he returned, he would not find the fragile mother he thought he could bully. He would find me. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as the rain began to hammer against my apartment windows. Caleb's voice was not the usual polished veneer he used in business meetings or holiday gatherings. It was ragged, uneven, frayed like rope pulled too taut. "Mom," he began without preamble, "I need you." Those words once would have cracked my heart wide open. Once I would have dropped everything, believing my son's need was sacred. But the pause that followed was long enough for me to hear the weight behind them. Not love, not reconciliation, but desperation. "I'm drowning," he continued. "Investments went bad, partners pulled out, everything Dad left is tied up in debt. But you could fix this. You've been sitting on assets that should have been mine. Do you really want to see your only son ruined? Don't you owe me that much?" I closed my eyes. "Owe me." The words slid into my ear like poison. Motherhood for him had become a currency, not love, not memory, debt. "I don't owe you, Caleb," I said quietly. "But I'll meet you at the garage one last time. We'll talk there." The next afternoon, the garage smelled of damp concrete and oil. I had swept the floor that morning, set 2 chairs in the center, and placed Thomas's letter between them like an offering. When Caleb arrived, he looked older than his 39 years, hair disheveled, tie loosened, eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep or too much whiskey. He didn't sit, he paced. "Why here?" he demanded, scanning the shelves, the walls. "Why this miserable place?" "Because this is where your father left his truth," I said. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the letter and extended it toward him. "Read it, please. Hear his words, not mine. Maybe then you'll understand." He snatched it from me, eyes darting across the page. At first his jaw tightened, then his lips curled, not in grief but in rage. "So this is it," he growled, shaking the paper. "This is your proof, a confession that he never trusted me, that he built some secret kingdom with you as the queen, and you sit here like the faithful widow, thinking this makes you righteous." "Caleb, no." He slammed the letter onto the table, his voice rising until it echoed against the metal walls. "All my life, I worked to prove myself, to carry this family forward. And what did I get? A father who doubted me, a mother who chose her comfort over her son. Do you know what that feels like, to be betrayed by your own blood?" His words pierced, but deeper than pain was clarity. Love, I realized, does not guarantee goodness. I had poured myself into raising him, bandaged his wounds, celebrated his victories, shielded him from storms. And yet here he stood, a man who could not see me as anything but an obstacle, who saw his father's caution as betrayal instead of care. "Caleb," I whispered, steadying myself with the truth I had long avoided, "your father loved you, I love you, but love is not the same as entitlement. You were never promised everything, and I will no longer let you take what was not meant for you." His chest heaved, his fists trembling at his sides. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "I'll make sure of it." He stormed out, the door slamming so hard the walls rattled. The echo lingered long after his footsteps faded. I sat in the silence, Thomas's letter lying crumpled on the table. My heart ached with the rawness only a mother can know, the grief of loving a child who has lost his way, the helplessness of realizing love cannot always redeem. But under the ache, another feeling stirred. Relief. For the first time, I had set a boundary that could not be crossed. I had chosen truth over fear, strength over submission. The garage was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. I whispered into the stillness, more to myself than to the man I had once cradled in my arms. "I wasn't afraid of you, Caleb, not anymore." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. The weeks after Caleb stormed out of the garage were quieter than I had expected. No more pounding on my door, no more frantic phone calls, no more guilt-laden messages about what I owed him. Just silence. And in that silence, I began to hear something I hadn't heard in a very long time, myself. I knew I couldn't let the antiques and paintings sit in those crates forever, waiting for dust, or worse, discovery. With Grace Alcott's guidance, and the financial advisor she'd introduced me to, I made the first brave decision of my new life. I sold a portion of the collection, just enough to secure my living expenses comfortably, but not all of it. Some things, I realized, were meant to be preserved, not liquidated. The funds went not only into my own safety, but into something Thomas would have been proud of. I invested in community programs, scholarships for young women, small grants for struggling local businesses, even a literacy initiative at the community center where I once volunteered. For the first time in decades, my money had purpose beyond survival. I moved into the orchard cottage soon after. Miguel had kept the place tidy, but when I walked through those creaking doors with a suitcase and a heart still tender from loss, it didn't feel like I was intruding. It felt like I was coming home. The first evening there, I cooked a simple meal, roast chicken, bread, and apples from the orchard, and invited Margaret from down the road, Miguel and his wife, and Grace. What began as a tentative gathering became the start of a tradition. Every week, I opened my home, and every week the table grew longer, the laughter louder. Neighbors brought pies, soups, bottles of wine. Slowly, I realized I wasn't replacing my family, I was building a new one chosen by kindness and care rather than blood and obligation. I would still think of Caleb, of course. A mother doesn't stop. But now those thoughts carried less fear and more acceptance. He had made his choices, and so had I. For the first time, my choice was to live for myself. One evening, just as the sun sank low behind the orchard, painting the sky in copper and rose, I walked the rows of apple trees Thomas had planted in my name. The air smelled sweet, like ripening fruit and warm earth. I slipped the old garage key from my pocket, the same rusted, ugly thing I once held with trembling shame, and turned it over in my palm. This was never just a key to a garage, I whispered into the fading light. It was a key to my freedom. I tilted my face toward the horizon, where the sky seemed endless. Thomas, you gave me more than wealth, you gave me back myself. For a moment, I swore the breeze through the branches carried his answer, soft and certain, like his hand resting once again in mine. As I headed back toward the cottage, the key still warm in my hand, I thought about everything people believe inheritance means. Gold, houses, numbers on a page, and I realized the truth I wanted to leave behind, the truth I now lived. People think inheritance is about money, I thought, smiling to myself. But sometimes, it's about finally learning your own worth. And for the first time in my 67 years, I knew mine. I never did get back the son I once knew. Maybe I never will. But I gained something I never thought possible at 67. My own strength, my own peace, my own worth. The garage key, once a symbol of humiliation, became the doorway to freedom, to community, to a life I could finally claim as mine. And when I walk through the orchard at sunset, whispering Thomas's name, I don't feel broken anymore. I feel whole, because healing isn't about erasing pain. It's about learning to live with it and still choosing joy. Tell me, what would you have done if your own child betrayed you for money? Could you forgive, or would you learn to let go like I did? If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the stories we carry are not about happy endings, but about finding ourselves again.